Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose, and we got some great news today for a game that, honestly, I was a little bit concerned about. On one side, I can sit here and say that Xbox Game Pass has had an absolutely amazing week, because quite frankly, it has. This has legitimately been one of this service's best weeks ever, which is really saying a lot. But there's also the reality that being good on paper doesn't always necessarily mean a lot in terms of real-time success. So, yeah, I can say I've been somewhat concerned here, but I can now push that feeling to the side, or at least somewhat, because we just got some fantastic news today. Not only for this game and for Xbox, but also for Nintendo. Records are breaking, and we're going to get into all of that as well. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and I truly do appreciate each and every one of you. Let's go get right into things, though, and a theme for this week has been about being overshadowed. It's been a fun week with some major gaming news. You know, we had the Switch 2 pre-order period, and, you know, that's been dominating the conversation online. And if the news hasn't been about the Switch 2, it's been about the shadow launch for Oblivion Remastered. In fact, Oblivion now has a 90 overall score on Metacritic, so big congrats to Xbox, Bethesda, and most importantly here, to RPG fans. Just fun times right now. However, this has all impacted other games and other announcements that were made this week, including the 100-line Last Defense Academy. Now, to be fair, I feel the name itself doesn't really do this game any favors. It's kind of generic, but nonetheless, it quietly released yesterday amidst all of the chaos, and I've not really seen a lot of online conversation about it. So if you are unaware about this game, its big selling point is that it comes from the Danganronpa and the Zero Escape creators. Myself, I'm a big fan of the Danganronpa series, and just from everything that I've heard, if you're a Danganronpa fan like myself, then you're going to be ecstatic about this new game. It has a lot of those strange, just despair-ridden vibes that we're so used to seeing from the Danganronpa series. In fact, and this is actually a little surprising to me, but this game currently has an 85 overall score on Metacritic, which is actually a higher rating than any of the Danganronpa games. I really wasn't aware that those games didn't review higher, which is kind of crazy to me. Those games are absolutely amazing, but apparently the 100 Line is a very good game and also a very long game. I feel like that is important to understand just because it's being described as a 100+ hour long game. So this is a big time investment if you get it. But I'd say if you're a Danganronpa fan, then you might want to check out the 100 Line Last Defense Academy, which is now available. And if you're still on the fence, there is a demo if you want to try it before you buy it. Now, Sega also revealed a little bit more about their Switch 2 launch title, Sonic X Shadow Generations. Pretty much like every other third-party game, it will be a game keycard. And even worse here is that if you own the Switch 1 version, there will be no upgrade path to the Switch 2 edition. I think Sega's kind of limiting themselves here. I do think this is a mistake on their part, but yeah, you will have to pay the full $50 asking price at launch, which I just don't think is worth it if you already own it. However, what I will say is that if you haven't already played it, this is legitimately a great Sonic title and arguably one of the better modern-day Sonic games, just period. So I can definitely recommend it to those that haven't already played it, and I do believe that this will be a great fit for the Switch 2. Now, something that I am happy about, though, is that Resident Evil 4 Remake has officially surpassed 10 million units sold, which makes it the fastest-selling entry in the entire franchise, which, I mean, we're talking about an all-time great franchise here, so that's quite the milestone and really just well-deserved. Capcom really has done amazing work with the Resident Evil remakes, especially Resident Evil 2 and 4, but even beyond that, I can make a very real argument that they've been hands down the best third-party publisher since probably about 2017, which is when they released Resident Evil 7. I mean, really from that point forward, they've been just so consistent with their quality, and especially when it comes to the Resident Evil series. So fans really just kind of trust them right now, and to see their work pay off in this way is just so great to see. I'd also say that this is a shining example of why companies are going just so strong into the remake treatment. When done right, as we're seeing here, fans will absolutely buy in because they're still some of the best games all of these years later. And Capcom is leading that push by example. I think the only question here, though, is just kind of what's next from Capcom. Obviously, these remakes have been insanely successful for them, so are they going to remake Resident Evil 5? Will they instead go with something like Code Veronica, or could they completely transition to an entirely different franchise? Dino Crisis would be an awesome option. I'm just going to go and throw that one out there. But right now, I am kind of expecting them to continue the Resident Evil remake treatment with something like Resident Evil 5. Either which way, though, big congrats to Capcom. It's well deserved. And speaking of congratulations, let's just go and get to the big topic of the day, and that's about Expedition 33. Now, I've mentioned this a few different times this week, but yeah, I've been a little concerned about this game. I feel like they just kind of ran into a wall of bad luck, because despite it being the best rated game of 2025, a lot of the online conversation right now is focused on other things, big things that happened this week, like the Switch 2 pre-orders or the Oblivion remaster. I still don't really understand Xbox's logic to launch that game the same week as Expedition 33. That was supposed to be a big game for Xbox Game Pass. So I do think that's a bit of a blunder on their part. But despite everything that's going against Expedition 33, it's still finding a way to beat the odds. You can see here that it already reached a peak high of 71,000 players on Steam. And just to kind of put that into perspective, Dragon Age of Velgard, that's a big AAA game from a well-established franchise, and it probably had 10 times the marketing push, and that game only got 89,000 concurrent players. So here, we're talking about a AA new IP, and it's already putting up similar numbers on Steam. And you also have to remember that a lot of people are currently playing it on Game Pass. So this is an incredible launch when you have the context, especially for a brand new IP. And in fact, the team on Twitter X announced that it's already surpassed 500,000 units sold. Again, you have to kind of understand the context of the situation. Here you have a brand new IP, so it's not selling on fanfare or nostalgia, and it's also going against the Switch 2 pre-order period and the Oblivion remaster within the same week. Then on top of that, it's also a Game Pass title, yet with all that in mind, it still has managed to sell 500,000 copies within its first 24 hours alone. I myself have purchased it as well. So, in other words, I can now say my concern seems to have been for naught. Now, I do kind of wonder if that number would have been even higher if Oblivion wouldn't have launched this week, but either which way, gamers are buying in, and they're buying in droves, and that's the most important thing. Now, as a bit of a side note, this also kind of speaks to the narrative that AAA turn-based games, quote-unquote games, aren't worth the investment. A lot of AAA publishers have kind of run away from turn-based games over time. Square Enix and the Final Fantasy franchise is probably the most infamous series that's gone away from turn-based combat, but there are several examples that goes against that logic. You can look at something like the recent Yakuza titles. There's Baldur's Gate 3, the Persona series, ReFantazio. That's another brand new IP, and now with this as well. At the end of the day, these turn-based games, when they're done right, they are selling very well. And in the case of Expedition 33, this one, its high production value turn-based combat was actually one of its main selling points. It's familiar, but it's also creative. And that's been a big, big hype point for a lot of JRPG fans leading up to its release. So just maybe AAA publishers should kind of take note of actually being somewhat creative. Once again, though, big congrats to the Expedition 33 team, and if you haven't already played it, at least put it on your wish list, because this might legitimately end up being the game of the year. Now, one last thing before we go, let's go and talk about the Switch 2 and its launch expectations. I mean, we kind of saw it with the pre-order period. This is going to be an absolutely massive launch, there's no doubt about that. But just how big is it actually going to be? Well, an analyst is now predicting that it's going to be the biggest console launch of all time, with a potential of 6.6 million units sold. And this is partially because Nintendo revealed that 2.2 million consumers applied for the Switch 2 Nintendo Store pre-order lottery. This analyst said that as Japan accounts for a third of global Switch installation base, it implies 6.6 million pre-orders globally. Now, keep in mind that Nintendo has already confirmed that they won't be able to meet that 2.2 million demand in Japan, so this 6.6 million figure really seems to come down to if Nintendo can actually manufacture that many consoles. And I mean, that's a lot of consoles, to put it short. Just to kind of put that into perspective, the biggest launch up to this point is for the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4, which both sold 4.5 million units for their launch. So we're talking about a 2 million plus increase. That is a massive jump over the previous record. But, at the end of the day, I hope this is true. I believe there absolutely is a demand for at least 6.6 million at launch. I really wouldn't be surprised if it's got even higher demand than that. So I hope they can make this many units, because this really would go a long way in battling the many scalpers out there and just getting it into the hands of actual legitimate customers. I just hope that the Switch 2 will be somewhat easy to buy compared to recent console launches, which didn't go that well, and flooding the market is really the best way Nintendo could do that. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode, but until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.